online, you will notice a recurring theme going through here. Jennifer talked about doing the basics right. Still doing the basics right. You, Leanne, Jennifer, and Martin, not giving away their age, but have got a lot of experience with this, but we still seem to be talking about the same issues time and time again, despite the changes in the code, despite being up to edition 9 now of the code and the changes in GFSI, changes in other schemes as well. We still seem to be looking at how do we address some of the fundamentals. One of the ways of doing that will be by food safety culture, and food safety culture is now something you're hearing a lot of these days. I would like to introduce Claire, who's going to give her perspective on a pragmatic solution to food safety culture. Again, Claire's been around for a while. She's not really as old as she looks, but she's been around for a while. She's worked in the food industry since '87, and worked as a consultant, trainer, and auditor all around the world, not just in Australia. Starting in the meat processing floor and moving up, she's audited in 14 countries in Europe, North America, and South Africa. South Africa or South America? South America. South Pacific, beg your pardon. She's currently working with national food manufacturers implementing food safety culture across 5 cities in Australia, developed a number of different food safety culture training courses in her role with ICS. Can you please join me in welcoming Claire Winkle?
Hi, Bill, and everybody else, all the SQFers. Yeah, this is a topic close to my heart, and it's one that I've been working on for a while. I mean, I was working on it without even knowing that it was called food safety culture for a long time, but it's something, particularly in the last couple of years, I've got really involved with. And as an auditor, as an SQF auditor this year, yes, I've given a non-conformance against clause 2112. And backing up exactly what Martin said of what was the issue, what was not done. But the real root cause in that particular issue was what Jennifer said, failure for effective internal auditing. They'd done their audit against management responsibility part of SQF early in this year. When SQF 9 came out and was released, they didn't go back and check to see if there'd been any changes. And of course, there's been a lot of changes in that section of the standard, which they didn't pick up and therefore didn't document and didn't implement along the way. Okay, so as Bill said, I've worked with lots of different people around the place. I currently work with Integrity Compliance Solutions, and we're a small training provider, and we're all auditors, and we're based out of Brisbane, but we do a huge amount of work virtually, and we also now have online provisions. And so we have consulting and training clients all across the Pacific, West Coast USA, and the whole lot of little islands, and also in the Caribbean. So the interesting thing for me is, what is the definition of food safety culture? Even as documented definitions, they're different. And I've only got a couple of them here. So for ZANS, the Australian New Zealand Food Standards Code, they state it as in a business, it's how everybody, the owners, managers and employees, then can act in their daily job to make sure that the food they make and serve is safe. But as Jennifer mentioned, it's also about having pride in producing safe food every time and recognising that a good quality product must still be safe to eat. The GFSI definition is shared values, beliefs and norms that expect the mindset and behaviour toward food safety in and across and throughout an organisation. And that links back to Martin's last example about sabotage, but also that nobody in management was really interested to go digging of why the allergen was there. So SQF has taken that GFSI definition, but then added to it with elements of food safety culture, are those elements of the food safety management system, which the senior management of the company may use to drive the food safety culture within the company. And these include, but are not limited to, communication about food safety policies and responsibility, training, and everybody's talked about training this morning, employee feedback on food safety related issues. So that's the workers telling the management, and performance measurement. And that's a huge one that people simply have to be doing. So the interesting thing that's happened this year, and I think about April this year, that the European Union have actually brought in legislated food safety culture. Not sure how it's going to work in a real world, but the legislation asks management and all employees to commit to an appropriate food safety culture, which includes clear distribution of responsibilities, training, supervision, verifying controls that are performed timely and efficiently, and that documentation is current. Now, the actual words of the legislation was taken straight out of the 2020 edition of Codex. So hopefully everybody knows that last December, I think about Christmas week, there was a new version of Codex printed. That was the first change since 2003, and they have a section on food safety culture. And this is not all of it, it's just summary. And the elements that they consider as important for positive food safety culture is the commitment of management and all staff to the production and handling of safe food, leadership to set the right direction, engage all personnel in food safety practices, awareness of the importance of food hygiene by all personnel in the business, open and clear communication among all personnel in the business, including communication of deviations and expectations, which takes you back to Martin's example about sabotage. I'd say everybody in that workplace knew that no complaints were investigated, nothing would happen, and it would keep on keeping on. And then this is a really big one that I think is incredibly relevant in Australia: the availability of sufficient resources to ensure effective functioning of the food hygiene system. So the things that both Jennifer and Martin have talked about, like basic cleaning, having enough cleaners, and having enough time. So what does SQF Clause 2112 actually require? And this is at a minimum of requirements: the establishment and documentation of clear and concise food safety objectives and performance measures, and their communication to all staff. Adequate resources available to meet those food safety objectives and performance measures. Food safety practices that are applicable to the requirements of the SQF system are adopted and maintained, not just written up once and said, that's right, we don't have to do it again. Staff are informed and aware of their food safety and regulatory responsibilities. Staff are aware of their role in meeting the requirements of the SQF codes and are held accountable for meeting those requirements. So it's not just go and tell them, get them to sign off the induction sign, which they probably can't read in a language that they're literate in. It's actually making sure it's happening on the factory floor or the farm floor. Staff are positively encouraged and required to notify management of actual or pending food safety issues. And that in itself is usually a huge change in food safety culture, A, for the management to allow that to happen, and B, for the workers to actually have the courage and confidence to do that. And staff are empowered to act and resolve food safety issues within their scope of work. So what are the auditors looking for? First up, concise food safety objectives and performance measures. Not 20 pages of policies. It could literally be 2 lines, precise and concise. And then make sure that all the staff know those performance measures exist and what it means to them in their own responsibilities. And then evidence that you did measure those objectives. What I've seen in some places is people have written some great objectives, great action plans, but that was it. Then they were shelved, and then people didn't do anything about them, let alone measure them. If you didn't meet them, that's not a great failure, but then identify why didn't you meet them? What can you change next time? Maybe the objectives were too high, too aspirational. And then making sure that every person on site, including your casuals, your seasonal, your agency staff, have been trained. Let them know what their legal obligations are as a food handler. That is FSAN Section 322. And what are the symptoms of notifiable diseases? That's also in FSANs. That's to ensure that they don't come to work at your workplace with those diseases. Have written job descriptions so people actually know what their job is. A safe communication method for line staff to tell someone who'll do something about it, about a pending or actual food safety issue within their scope of their work. Probably there was someone at that factory that Martin talked about who did know what was happening, but they weren't going to say something because A, they didn't trust their bosses to actually do something about it with good reason. And that staff are encouraged to say something if they see something. And this is a huge one, that staff have enough equipment, people and time to get their responsibilities done. So you need to probably convince your boss why you have to do it. And you might say, hey, we'll get a major non-conformance in our next SQF audit. But that may not be enough to get him across the line. What you need to do is show them some of the classic case studies that have occurred in different countries around the world and show them what it meant to the bottom line of the business. So Jack in the Box, yep, back to 1993. Yep, it's history, but we should all know our history so we don't repeat it. 732 cases of hemorrhagic E. coli. Most of them were under 10 years old, so kids. 4 died. 178 chronic illnesses, which would mean kidney transplants. And it was covered in 73 different Jack in the Box outlets. And so Jack in the Box is still the #3 burger chain in the United States after McDonald's and Burger King. They managed to survive this and even come back better. The root cause was undercooked hamburgers. But why the hamburgers were undercooked was a long litany of issues. And the year before, the individual store staff were submitting quality improvement requests about their complaints of undercooked hamburgers, and they were suggesting solutions of how they could rectify it. Now, they didn't understand the full root cause, but somebody at head office, if they'd ever read it, would have been able to work out the root cause and rectify it quite simply long before this issue happened. But they didn't. They ignored it and didn't ask about the customer complaints. They didn't ask about the regulatory issues that were identified at those stores. This is another one that many Australians may not have heard of. In 2015, the Bluebell Creameries, one of the US's largest ice cream manufacturers, had a listeria outbreak. So 3 people died and there was at least 10 illnesses, but there was probably a lot more that weren't reported. And it led to a shutdown of all the Bluebell plants, a layoff of 30% of its workforce. And then while the plants were closed, they had a cash crisis and then they got taken over. But that's not the really interesting part. A Bluebell shareholder then sued the Bluebell management and the board of directors, saying that they'd utterly failed to adopt or implement any food safety reporting or compliance systems. And therefore it was a breach of their duty of loyalty under a particular regulation in the US. Now that was really interesting. But the board said that they were unaware of any red or yellow flags about the growing food safety issue at the Bluebell plant. Now that may be right because the plant manager and the CEO was doing everything they could to keep this under wraps and actually lie to customers, lie to regulators, and all the people underneath them who were trying to stick their hand up and say something were basically squashed. So this is a case, and I've got a couple of write-ups of this particular situation because it's been ongoing. They've been sued for more things, and that's the type of the stuff you need to show your boss and the board of directors. Now, the New Zealand MPI have produced a director's checklist in relation to food safety culture. This is very interesting reading and highlights the legal obligations of the managers and the directors and the board. Very useful tool to show your bosses. And in Australia, many people think they have to do surveys and questionnaires. Listening at SQF conference last year, I realised that the North Americans are not obsessed by surveys. The South Americans certainly are not undertaking surveys, and the Southeast Asians said, what's your problem? Workers do as they're told. That's just the thing. So you do not have to do a survey or questionnaire. You can choose to, but there are a lot of other places you can go to identify what you've got, what your baseline is, and what your issues are. You could look at statistical analysis of the data you already have. You could look at your objectives. You could start working on some action plans. So one of the key things that you have to do for SQF and all the other GFSI standards is actually have a baseline and then have an action to improve that baseline with your food safety culture. You already have a huge amount of data in your workplace that you're documenting, but you may not be looking at, you may not be reviewing and analysing effectively, such as customer complaints, allergen issues, labelling issues, ineffective cleaning, foreign object incidents, staff turnover, a huge one. Now, all of those things can be an interest of a workplace culture issue, a lack of care, a lack of interest, or worse, sabotage. Use that data to identify areas that can be improved. Then you'll identify some objectives that then will help you identify action plans. But make sure the line staff are part of that solution and also part of being able to have discussion and say what they think the issues are in their workplace. And the workers will be essential to identify those root causes and come up with potential solutions, which might be a bit more creative than you think. So last year at the SQF conference, Bill Maher, who's probably the most well-known food safety lawyer in the world, he had a presentation on this topic. And I loved his phrase, stop the bus before it falls off the cliff. Have a safe place to alert someone if there's a problem, and so that everybody knows that there's a safe place to stick your hand up on. There are always warning signs before the food safety incident, like Jack in the Box. If you've had a failed audit, or if you've been issued a couple of major non-conformances in your last audit, whether it be from Coles, any other retailer, SQF or any other standard, look long and hard at the issues. So one of Bill's earliest cases was a fruit juice company with unpasteurised fruit juice where they had had an E. coli outbreak. They had previously had a US Army audit report that stated their products were unfit for human consumption. Now, that should have been a really big wake-up call. If they'd done something after that, they wouldn't have had dead people. And of course, Bill Maher got a hold of that audit report and used it as part of his court evidence to damn them. And he said, take a much closer look at your environmental monitoring program results. Challenge yourself to look around the corner. So I've got a couple of case studies here with different clients I've worked with, and some of them are quite small and modest, but the other one is a huge, much bigger issue. But they both started in the same place. A certified SQF company. The first one had problems with blue plastic in specific products. So they analysed the complaints and sourced it back to one work team and the blue plastic issue with gloves. The key ingredient that team was working with was butter. So the team hated the gloves because it made handling the butter blocks really hard. The team's solution was stop wearing the gloves. The QA team knew that pathogenic bacteria could survive in the butter, particularly salmonella, hence why the gloves were there in the first place. But the QA team said, okay, let's not wear the gloves. We're going to swab your hands before and after and during work time, which they did. The test results were all clear for all team members. The company wrote the project up in their newsletter, celebrated the success with a barbecue. The QA team wrote up the measurable KPIs and passed the SQF audit. Small, but effective and successful. This was SQF certified company number 2. They too had complaints of blue plastic in specific products. They had 3,000 complaints to analyse across 2 countries and multiple plants, and they sourced it back to one processing plant and identified the blue plastic as carton liners in the raw material, which was frozen meat blocks. The blue carton liners were almost guaranteed to be entrapped in the frozen blocks of meat since they were used frozen, put straight into a large mincer. The blue plastic pieces weren't seen by the operators, and the blue plastic pieces weren't detected in the metal detectors, magnets, or X-rays. Now, the company already had a corporate goal of foreign object elimination, and this goal was set as plastic elimination in 100% of meat suppliers. So that's a pretty big goal. They went back to their meat suppliers who thought, we've got to go back to our carton manufacturers, which they did. So the carton manufacturer is working on two options: thick blue plastic bags, which are less likely to be entrapped in the product, and waterproof linerless cartons. So this is a radical new product for this industry. And that product's currently both products are being trialled currently. And they look like at this stage, they'll reduce the product contamination risk in the raw meat, reduce manual handling when tempering the meats, and reduce plastic waste. And that is a really interesting thing for me, because it's not just helping with the issue of plastic in the end product, but helping in all these other areas. And that's what you find with food safety culture. When it starts working, it has a ripple effect in many other areas. So, second plant analysed all the complaints and foreign objects, and priority areas were identified. So that was at a corporate level. So at other plants, they're looking at other types of foreign objects. And at each of the different plants, foreign object champions were appointed. Customer complaint data was shared at the point of occurrence, down to plant line level. So everybody knew what the issues were. Root cause analysis undertaken at a plant level using visual coaching boards that were visible for everyone to see. Training in place for every single worker about foreign object awareness. Then at the plant level, they introduced extra monitoring. So visual inspection of all meat being received, visual inspection of work in progress after the mixing step, and that all non-conformances were consistently documented and raised back to their suppliers. And that actually is an important thing that a lot of people don't do, because then the suppliers realise the extent of the problem and realise it's not a one-off, it's a constant, and there is a capital cost to these issues. Just for everyone's interest, the company involved is not the one from the photo, but the boxes could be similar that they were using. So think about action plans at work. Start with the small that reduce your risk, like the Blue Glove project. Use the data you already have. Take on a project that's going to work. Celebrate that success and write it up. Keywords, write it up. If it's not written down, it doesn't exist. Then you pass your SQF 9 audit. But then next year, think about something bigger. Think about something that will eliminate the risk, like the new meat box without plastic liners. Set those big, hairy, audacious goals. Then consider corporate goals that may not just be food safety, but may have an occupational health and safety issue, sustainability on top of your food safety. You'll find that they go together. Listen to what the workers really want and consider the whole of the supply chain, not just what your initial customer wants or needs. And this is something that a lot of people have issues with. How do they really know what the people on the floor want? Big thing, listen. Have a safe place for them to communicate. And so listening to what Martin's talked about the ongoing non-conformances, and what Jennifer's talked about what Cold sees as issues, they're what I see as an auditor out in the world and what people talk about in my training. So some of the really basic things I want people to consider in food safety culture is implementation of 5S, that a lot of people may be aware of and may be working with. It's a Japanese methodology based on the sort, set in order, shine, standardise and sustain. The theory behind it is that dirty or cluttered or damaged surfaces attract the eye. The brain spends a second or two trying to work out what they need to do. Old equipment hides new equipment, and then people actually waste time or choose the wrong equipment, the wrong part, like in the photo that I've got, and it doesn't make a nice place to work. So sort means remove unnecessary items, dispose of them properly, remove all parts and tools that are not in use. Set in order, prevent loss and waste of time by arranging the workplace in a way that all equipment is in close proximity to its use location. Would seem to be common sense, but it's so rarely implemented. Shine, clean your workplace completely and then use cleaning as an inspection tool. Standardise the best practices in your work area, then maintain everything in order and according to the standard. And the one that I like is sustain. Perform those regular audits, and it's actually getting the team to audit themselves. Use training as a goal-oriented process and use that feedback back into the training. Celebrate the success and show everybody what good looks like. So if we're doing Shine, which is about cleaning really, take photographs first up so people can see what they've achieved. Explain to everybody what it means and get them to set their own goals. Develop a uniform test to evaluate cleanliness. Not everybody has the same opinion on cleanliness. My mother and my mother-in-law are polars apart in that area. So you need to know what good looks like, and the team needs to set their own goals. They need to have their effective cleaning supplies and time in their work time to do the cleaning effectively. People need to know what time and what shift that they would be doing the cleaning, when is it going to be inspected, what monitoring that they should be doing on themselves, and then get better at the cleaning. And then take photographs at the end so people know how far they've got. Now, this is an interesting one. So we see in all the different parts of food safety culture, they talk about communication, upwards, downwards, sideways. So this came out of one of my courses, and I think it may have come from the aged care industry, but it's a brilliant tool. It's called above the line, below the line. And this is where the teams set their own behaviour rules. What they want to see, which is above the line, and what they don't want to see, which is below the line behaviours. And the team decide it, they agree it, they document it. And so if they have to pull up their peer who's standing next to them on the line for doing something wrong, they don't have to dob them in, they just have to say to them, hey mate, that was a bit below the line, wasn't it? And it makes that person stop and think, oh yeah, I did agree to that list. And it's a very effective communication tool. Another one with communicating from the management down to the workers and backwards. So if you have done a survey or some type of feedback and people have said what they want to know and what they want to see as a change, list it, document it. Then say, okay, the management then heard that list as another column, and then what did management do about it? And have it publicly available. And it's often used for occupational health and safety for incidents and accidents, but it can be equally as used for food safety culture issues. So document your action plans, implement points that have been raised either by your surveys, your audits, your focus groups. And senior management needs to have been seen to be part of the participation. So actively providing appropriate resources, which I feel in Australia in many times is time. It's not just money. Then that allows the action plans to actually be fully implemented. Allocate the responsibility and accountability along with the timeframes. And you want the people doing the action plan implementation to be from right across the business. It's not something that the QA manager has to do on their own at Saturday afternoon. So determine the resources, keep management in that communications loop, but also communicate with every person and not just the negative feedback, also share the positive feedback. So here's an example of a food safety culture action plan that I've got in my training. The performance of the key listed areas will be measured quarterly and reported within the management review structure. So they've got it down to 2 individual issues. And the reason that they chose these 2 individual issues was the results of their internal and external reviews and audits over the last 12 months. So they were audited. I was in there doing a gap audit. Other people were in there, a couple of different CBs with different types of standards. And they realised they had some key issues. The first one, control of loose objects within the production areas, specifically maintenance tools and parts. That KPI was chosen to reduce the risk of customer complaints and to minimise the risk of potential internal sabotage. Then the other big one was site security, specifically access to the production areas by people other than the production staff. This KPI was chosen to minimise the risk of potential sabotage by external parties and also the loss of company intellectual property, because they had some very interesting recipes and some very interesting equipment. But the doors were propped open. They had an electronic security system that totally was avoided by people with bits of wood chocking the doors open. So the 2 action plans, first up, carry out staff training for both production and maintenance staff in loose object control. Ensure that there's actually storage areas for tools and parts in each workplace location. Have monthly GMP audits that include reviewing for loose objects, and that they're going to trend those results and present them at management review. Similarly, with the site security, train production and maintenance staff, and then ensure that all external contractors undergo formal induction prior to the work on site that includes site security requirements. Monthly GMP audits that specifically check locked and unlocked doors and entry points across the site. Then get someone like myself, unknown to site staff, to come in and do a site security assessment. And I would write a report and highlight where I accessed, at what time and how, and if anyone stopped me. And in this particular case, absolutely nobody stopped me. They actually opened the doors for me as the external maintenance guys walked in with their pies and chocolate milks into the production areas. No, it was not an SQF site. So that is how people should be succinctly documenting their food safety objectives, their food safety culture action plans, and what are they going to do about it and how are they going to measure it. It's an ongoing journey. It's not a one-stop destination. You need to empower the workers so that they can say their 2 cents worth and have their view on how to improve culture, and that any worker can remind another when they're not following food safety practice by saying, hey, that's below the line. That everyone does know their responsibilities and expectations because they've been trained and have a written job description. And maintain that communication and consider any crazy idea. Some of my best workplace changes have come from workers with crazy ideas that I would just sit and listen until they came up with the solution I needed. Share what good looks like, reinforce that message. Then think about how long it took to stop people smoking at work and in planes, restaurants and pubs. I remember flying to London with people smoking around me. I have no idea how I survived. So there's lots and lots of reference material out there. This is just a tiny list. And if you come to our training courses, we give you lots of handouts. So I'll just look at all the questions that are coming up. Yeah, 5S. I love 5S. And then case study 1 about washing hands. Yeah, washing hands works. Probably something I will say is that during COVID, there's been a 50% drop of foodborne illnesses in Australia. In Germany, I think it was an 85% drop. And I think a huge part of that is washing your hands, sanitising and not coming to work sick. So, Leanne's question about food safety culture being assessed through a fully remote audit. Really, really difficult. It would just be luck to pick up an issue. Yeah, I've done some fully remote audits in the last 2 years, not many, but I don't know whether you could pick up food safety culture issues. And so there's been a mention here about exit surveys for staff. So yeah, that's something that's come up while I've been doing this course and the food safety culture workshop. We often have HR managers, and that's something I get them to consider. If they are doing exit surveys, are they actually reading it? Are they actually following on with the issues? And in many cases, no. And yeah, so there's a lot of different things you can do, some really interesting cases that have come up. And so, yeah, I have a 4-hour workshop, virtual and face-to-face, but I also have a short 1-hour online module that you can do as well. So, yeah, as everyone's saying, food safety culture. Yeah, it is a feeling. It's really hard to get it. It's the looks. It's actually watching what people do. And this was an audit quite a few years ago, wasn't an SQF audit, and I was being witnessed by an accreditation body auditor. I was checking the metal detector CCP. An object was put into a box and it had a big pink sign on it. The carton went through, wasn't picked up by the metal detector. Even though this box had a big pink sign on it, it just went flying through all the rest of the line and was about to be put onto the pallet and be shrink wrapped. So I had to intervene. And we did that with all 14 metal detector lines on site. And I think probably about 5 of the 14 lines, not only did the metal detector not work, but nobody picked up the box. And that is just, and nobody did anything about it, not even the people with me on the audit. And that's the type of thing you want to see, and that's an indicator about that nobody's really interested in food safety culture. And that plant's not there anymore. And they got taken over.
Claire, I've got an additional question. I haven't typed it in the chat, but a question without notice, which might be a little bit difficult to answer. But can you have a strong food safety culture without a good organizational culture?
Sometimes you can by accident, particularly I think in a smaller organisation where everybody knows each other and they talk a lot and everything is openly communicated, but they aren't necessarily writing it down. And so even though they might have a good culture, they still mightn't pass their audit because they haven't documented the objectives and they haven't got the measurement.
Yeah, I'm not just talking about the audit. I'm talking about, the behaviours and attitudes of in food safety, which might be strong. They've got a good SQF practitioner, they've got a good technical manager, etc. But the senior management attitude still sucks, so they're basically doing an isolation. And that applies a lot where you have to start with the senior management on the side of senior management within the organization. So how do you, the tools you're providing are great, don't get me wrong, but how do you get that message through to senior management that it's not just about the attitudes and behaviors for food safety, it's right across the organization?
Well, that's why I brought in these case studies like Bluebell. And I've got a number of other ones as well. And to bring back and look at the bottom line and look at who gets sued. Your workers don't get sued. They might lose their job, but it's the owners, it's the board of directors, it's the CEO who's going to be up there in the dock. And let's look back at Garibaldi. And now they were charged with manslaughter. It's that stuff that I know it's awful, but for a lot of top management, that is actually what you have to bring it down to is Garibaldi owners in the dock for manslaughter.
Leanne saying in the US they go to jail. Here, what we just put them in another organization? No, I'm kidding. Senior management engagement, Ravi saying, is key for a successful food safety culture in any organization. Yeah, and I agree, because a lot of what you've covered some great tools, but I guess my concern is a lot of them are tools that the food safety department, quality department can implement, but they still don't have that it's how you get that management buy-in so that it's continuing, it's ongoing.
Yep.
It applies right across the organization, not just to food safety. Otherwise, you're still going to get that, break in the culture there somewhere.
And probably the company I'm working with, which is the one with the meat box, and I know they're on this presentation, what they're doing at each plant is different, and it's the plant level people who are having the say in what their action plans are. But it's being led at a corporate level with the customer complaints, the foreign object issues, and so forth. So they're working in it from both directions at the same time, from what corporate's doing, but also letting the plants lead on the nitty-gritty of what's going to happen in that plant. And each plant is coming up with really different action plans. And some of the plants are a bit more cynical than others, but the bosses are there each presentation, each discussion, and saying, yep, if that's what you want, we'll look at that, we'll resource it, yep. And so they are a brilliant example.
Okay, Claire, thank you for that. I'm going to have to cut it off there. I think we could discuss food safety culture for a long time. A great presentation, by the way. Thank you for that. And a lot of very